LinkedIn presents.
Hey everyone, it's Morra. I'm jumping in to share another podcast with you. I was recently a guest on the new podcast, We Two Are One. Host Martin Gale reached out. He and I have been LinkedIn friends for a while, and he asked me to join him to talk about my own tricky brain and my big ambitions and how they work together well and sometimes they fight with each other, and his own experience being diagnosed late in his life, his big career working for large companies, and we really go deep. I share some of my story. I hope you check it out. We Two Are One is a really interesting concept, and it focuses on people who have ADHD, autism and ADHD, but its applications are really relevant for all of us. I hope you enjoy it.
So welcome, Morra. The fact it feels like I've known you for forever is such an admirable trait for a podcast. And before we get started, the first thing I've got to ask you is, how'd you do it?
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. That's actually the best compliment anybody could give me. I
Oh,
it really is, because I think the reason I do this work is definitely not to become rich and famous. But I felt so alone during my whole career, basically, and actually looking back in my childhood, even just alone and not really understood. But the few times that I met someone who I felt understood me or I understood them, it was magical, right? It was like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not so weird, right? you know? And I think that the ability to make someone feel seen is such a gift in life. And so if I can give that to people, it's sort of what keeps me going.
interestingly, you've read my mind, because my next question was going to be about your personal journey and kind of how that led you to doing things like the anxious achiever, because I think I can see, as a neurodivergent person, why I feel such a connection with you, because you talked a little bit, I mean, you mentioned it even then, about this sense of feeling a bit of an outsider when you were growing up. I mean, how did that manifest itself when you were young?
So funny. I don't know if any of your listeners will resonate, but I think I knew that I was different from when I was 3 years old, honestly.
Wow.
And my first manifestation, I had agoraphobia when I was 3, so I couldn't go outside for a long time. And my parents couldn't figure out why. And I know my mom was very worried about me. And I was just always a lot. Just, I don't know any other way to say it than I was a lot. I was very smart. So I'm what's called twice exceptional, and I don't know if this resonates with you or if any of your listeners, but I have a pretty high cognitive ability, and also I have neurodivergence and a lot of stuff. So I was always sort of different and special, and always getting sort of talked to by the teachers, and, like, they had to have a lot of meetings with my parents. I was a girl, so I wasn't, like, disruptive and hyper like boys
Mm.
might be. There's so much gender stuff here, but, it was always a lot of, like, "Well, Maura can't really fit in," or "She talks too much during class," or kids would stop I was crying all the time. It was just a lot. So I think I've always had this sense that, I don't quite fit in and that I'm different, um, and very, very anxious and just a lot of, emotional turmoil. But I was first diagnosed when I was 19 with what they call cyclothymia, which is now bipolar 2. And so that's when and major depressive disorder and and anxiety. And so I think that's when it all sort of was like, "Oh, okay, maybe there's a framework," you know?
Mm. And I was going to say, from that sort of backcloth, you went on to be Harvard educated. I mean, how did you find adapting, given that diagnosis and given what you knew about yourself going into Harvard? How was that?
I mean, there's tons of us out here, there's tons of us. We're we're good at adapting. We're great at masking, and we have incredible gifts, right? So, I mean, I think that part of this whole equation of having what I call a tricky brain is that there are pluses and minuses, and so it's not a simple equation. And I am very ambitious. I always wanted a really big life. And I think that that's what propelled me. And it's also what has made things a little more challenging.
And part of my drive for creating a podcast like this was to try and, I guess, kind of soothe the discomfort of those of us with anxiety and sensitivity, due to our neurodivergence. For example, I've asked myself at least weekly over the last 3 decades, how on earth am I doing? How have I ended up here and why am I doing this to myself? But when I look at your professional career, you've had like real pressure cooker environments, presidential politics, corporate marketing. I mean, all of this with an anxious nature. How did you manage for that?
It's so funny. I don't know. I'm sure all your listeners know Saturday Night Live, the iconic sketch comedy show in the U.S. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, and they did a hilarious sketch, and it was called "Every SNL Performer Ever Has Anxiety," and it talked about how they are rushing to the bathroom before the show starts, and they're a wreck and ridden with anxiety, and I can't do it, and I don't deserve to be here. And then they get on stage and they create miracles, right? And I mean, in my experience, it's true for a lot of us. When we figure out how to push through, we're not stoppable. We have a lot of internal turmoil getting it done, but it doesn't necessarily stop us. And I think a lot of us also really learned how to mask. Like, we are very adaptive. And so we carry a high mental and emotional load, but we're able to sort of adapt outwardly a lot of times, at least for a while. And so, for me, I thrive on chaos. I love chaos. I love novelty. I love stress. It's when I have a quiet day that my demons start to eat away at me.
I mean, I can relate to that as well, because I think I'm often at my worst when I've not got much to do. Yeah, because I turn it in on myself and I think, oh, well, I'm not doing something and I should be doing something. And oh my God, what am I doing? Oh God, I'm so lazy. I'm going to die poor and lonely, that kind of stuff. But just on that thing of being unstoppable, what would you say when you look at your career as the achievement that you look back on most and think, wow, I did that?
I built a business and I sold it.
Mm.
Um, and, most women, only 2% of women in the US sell a business for over 7 figures, which I did. And
Wow.
I'm very proud of that because it was a beautiful business and it was a happy business and we did amazing work. We created mostly digital campaigns that mobilized women for social good. We worked on presidential campaigns and we worked for the United Nations and Malala, and we did amazing work. And that was one of my sort of busy brain ideas. I don't know if you can resonate or if your listeners can resonate if you have a sort of busy creative brain. I remember the vision for my company coming to me when I was literally nursing my first baby in bed one day. And I saw it. I saw the logo, I saw the mission, and that was it. So I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. And that thing of inspiration striking you when you least expect it. So this podcast is named We Two Are One because I remembered a Eurythmics album from the 80s that's got the same name. And I thought, and I just happened to see it on Spotify, and I thought that's a perfect message for inclusivity as well. It's kind of a punning thing and things like that. So I can completely relate to being somewhere completely unrelated and thinking, oh, that might be an idea for a thing.
This to me is interesting, which is I'm part of an online community of people with bipolar. And someone posted the other day, how many domain names do you own?
Oh,
And like a bunch of us were like, I mean, I own over 100 domain names, and I'm actually trying to sell them now because it's very expensive. But you know, w- I have inspiration, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go see if I can buy the domain name. Maybe I'll need it one day. My husband does it too, and I think there is that sense for some of us that the brain is very creative, and we sort of see inspiration in places.
just amazing. And one of the most inspired things must be The Anxious Achiever. And I wanted to dig into that, because I think it might be the single most relatable thing I've ever read. First, I wanted to sort of go through how your own experiences in the career and the life that you just described for us kind of evolved into this next phase of your career. What was the turning point where you sort of thought, oh, I've been inspired, just like you said, and out popped the anxious achiever?
I'm not like a normal person. I'm busy all the time and I'm always doing stuff and I'm not, I'm sort of like, I'm not scared of certain things that other people, I'm scared of a lot of things, but other things that scare a lot of people, like starting a new business or deciding to start a book or a podcast, that doesn't scare me. I'm like, cool,
Mm.
I'll try it. And I've been writing on the internet since 2004, and I've been writing about and researching um, making work for people for 17 years, even before I had a language for what was wrong with me. All I knew is that fluorescent lights gave me migraines and exhausted me, and I couldn't work in a lot of corporate offices. That's all I knew. And I thought, oh man, what is this called? So I've been doing it for a long time, blogging, freelance writing. And, as podcasting sort of came into vogue, I started my first podcast in 2014 called Hiding in the Bathroom, which was the title of my first book. And that was for the Forbes Business Publication
Mm.
Podcast Network, which was great. And then that ended, and I really had this flash about the anxious achiever. Again, that moment. I had been writing about anxiety and talking about anxiety for years, but it originally was called Anxious Ambition. And then Harvard Business Review suggested The Anxious Achiever, which I think is a better title. And I said to them, like, there's a market for this. And they were like, okay, we'll try it.
Well, I can confirm that because I've recommended it to so many different people now and said, you really need to read Morra's book and listen to her podcast. And I think instinctively when you say the title, people get a feel for what it might mean. But for those who might be listening and sort of thinking, oh, I wonder if that's me, just describe for us, an archetypal anxious achiever. What does one look like?
A friend of mine said that for an anxious achiever, anxiety is your oxygen.
Mm.
You almost don't know how to exist without it. And it fuels you. It keeps you sort of moving forward, right?
Mm.
But it also comes at a great cost because it's exhausting and it's
Mm.
hard for the people around you and it's hard for you and it sort of robs you of joy in a way. And so it's a double-edged sword. It's both the thing that, like you said, if I'm by myself, oh my God, I'm lazy. I call that the voice. I'm lazy. I'm gonna die alone and penniless, right? Like that's anxiety, and that I bet motivates you, and it's exhausting.
Yeah, very tiring. It's very tiring. And some classic examples. I know there's some that you've given in the book where you've worked with people at very senior levels in organizations. Again, would you mind sort of sharing one or two with the listeners so they can get a feel for just where this stuff is showing up in business?
Yeah, I mean, and I will say it's still challenging to get senior leaders, especially at publicly traded firms, to go on the record with this stuff. We have such a stigma around obviously mental illness, but even anxiety. People think anxiety is kind of a weakness.
Mm.
Um, I've had many people say to me, anxiety is kind of my secret superpower. It's my hidden superpower. Now, this isn't diminishing the impact of anxiety. Anxiety is hard, and there are times when it will totally take you down. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have had experiences where, anxiety has kept them sort of in their bed for weeks. I know I have. But when you get to a place where you can kind of manage it, it can actually really fuel a lot, right? The key is that you are driving the bus. Your anxiety isn't driving the bus.
Hmm.
And I often like to think of it as, a sort of co-pilot relationship with your anxiety, where you're not going to control it because we all know that doesn't work. And it's part of you. You can't cure it. People always email me and they're like, if you just took more vitamin D or if you did this meditation course or, you would be anxiety free. And I don't think that's happening. And I don't even know if I want to be anxiety free. And so the key is sort of building a relationship with it where it's your co-pilot and it might want to take the reins some days and you might want to say no. And then some days it might want to take the control and you're like, okay, let's do it. And I think the leaders that I've interviewed who have that successful relationship, like one of my very early interviews that I cherish to this day is with this president. He's not CEO, he's president of Shopify, which is the huge e-commerce platform that we've all bought a million things from, $53 billion market cap. And Harley Finkelstein. And, he, like a lot of us, I think, struggled with anxiety at a very young age, and it made him maybe not the most pleasant person to be around, but it really fueled him. He had an anxious childhood. And then he sort of reached a point after discovering therapy and meditation where he can really almost modulate his anxiety like you would if you're in a recording studio and raising the levels. And he called it his superpower.
And given that, why is it that many businesses are kind of in denial about anxiety? It feels like, I mean, the standard thing in the corporate world is, hey, if you're anxious, there's the employee assistance line right over there kind of thing. It's not seen as being a superpower in the way that you describe. What would be your observation of why that is?
I mean, we all come from such a deficit framework for this stuff. And I mean, I think your thing about the EAP is dead on. I think that the corporate instinct is to sort of medicalize it and treat it as a disability and something that, like, let's just outsource it and we won't have to think about it again. Everybody, because people tell me everything, everybody has anxiety right now. It's like,
Yeah.
duh. Teams are anxious, organizations are anxious, leaders are anxious. How could you not be anxious? The world is insane. It's just bananas bazonkers out there. And so I think that the truth is we're anxious because we're human. Some of us are more anxious than other people. Sometimes it gets out of control and it really needs to be treated. But for a lot of us, it's a daily part of our existence and we have to manage it. And sending us to EAP is not, it's kind of a false choice.
And many people with neurodivergence actually present as having anxiety, as you know. I mean, there's many cases of people who have been misdiagnosed with anxiety, who are late diagnosed with things like ADHD, autism, and various other things. The parallels, I guess, and the overlap between the anxious achiever thought and neurodivergence, what do you perceive those to be? Or are they one and the same?
So I think they're similar. I mean, I don't differentiate. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a disability expert. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist. So please take this with a caveat. But the people that I see and work with and who come to me are very high functioning. But to me, we are similar, whether we have clinical anxiety or we've been depressed all our life or we're bipolar or we're ADHD or we have sort of more classic neurodivergence. We have outlier minds, as someone recently called it. And I do know from speaking to lots of doctors that most neurodivergent people manage anxiety and a lot of them manage depression because it's just so darn hard. And so to me, I think that we sort of find each other and our experiences at work are often very similar.
And I actually happen to know that you're working on a new book about neurodivergence in the workplace. I mean, what inspired you to kind of home in on that as your next publication?
People coming to me and saying, hey, I love your work. And, I also have this thing. I think that the Venn diagram, if you will, is so strong that, and I don't know if it's just neurodivergence. I mean, just to be totally honest, the book is very early. I'm still doing research. To me, I'm sort of using the term neurodistinction as more of an umbrella term, because in my experience, neurodivergence, at least in the US, is it's perceived as sort of leaning on autism still. And someone I love very much is on this. Two people I love very much are on the spectrum, and I live with it every day. So I'm very grateful for that work, but I also sort of want to make sure it's a bigger umbrella. So I'm still sort of toying with the words, to be honest.
Yeah, and one of the things that's come up on one of the earlier interviews that we've done on this podcast actually is with someone who does a board advisory role here in the UK. And we were talking about how can we go from, quotes, accommodating neurodivergence in the workplace to actually harnessing it as an asset. How far away do you think we are from doing that?
The truth is we do it every day. I'm one of these people who believes that probably 50% of the workforce is neurodistinct in some way, right? If they're not diagnosed with a learning difference or ADHD or or autism spectrum disorder, they're managing mental illness, they got something going on. That's just how life is. And so I actually think that we deal with it every day. And the truth is that work sucks for most people. And I think a big reason why is we don't understand each other and we don't get what we need. So to me, I mean, and I love Ludmila Praslova's The Canary Code, because I think one of the things that she points out, and this is what my work for 17 years also points out, is that when work is flexible for everyone and we all can work to our strengths, everyone succeeds, not just those of us who have a diagnosis that needs to be accommodated.
And that is a 100% strike rate on every interview so far. Someone has made exactly that point, that if you actually have accommodations that benefit neurodistinct, neurodiverse people, then everybody wins. So why would you not do it? Is the obvious question, isn't it?
It's like, duh, except that what is happening, offices are mandating return to work. We're just going back to old habits that actually don't serve many people, and I don't know why.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that we've still seemed to live in this era, and RTO is a good example of it, where the default way of thinking about the workforce and certainly thinking about leaders is that you're going to have this kind of extroverted leader model. I mean, how can businesses create cultures in the current climate that embrace the sort of the anxious, the neurodivergent, or the more introspective people certainly into leadership roles?
Absolutely. The truth is that I think that we have to talk about it more. I think if leaders are scared to talk about their own experiences, then the stereotypes persist. And stereotypes don't serve anyone. I rarely go into an organization where everybody is this sort of handsome, charismatic, I'm a leader. I rarely see that. Yet we still think that's what a leader is. And I think that as long as we sort of prop up the mythology, we don't change. I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I found a struggle coming through the corporate world, so I had 20 years at IBM, then 7 years at Salesforce, is particularly earlier in my career, I would be presented with these sort of brushed aluminium cyber professionals as role models. And I would sit there looking at these people and they're, fabulous miracles of planning and organization and, surgical focus on what they were going to do with their career. But I would look at them and think, that's really not me. And all my role models were the people that were atypical in some ways. And I just used to try and steal things from those people. But that sense of there's a corporate identikit and it doesn't look like you, mate, was kind of a thing that came through and through and through in that corporate world. And I was going to ask you, in terms of the recurring themes that you see when you walk into workplaces, what sort of things are coming out? You walk into these various different companies. Are there sort of one and two things that you always see, where you always come across?
I mean, I think the thing that I always see is that your manager really matters.
Mm.
And all the research shows this, and all the research obviously around psychological safety really shows this, which is that you can have a little happy team with a great manager in a really dysfunctional organization. And if you're like us and you're different and you have a great manager, you can, sort of move along. You might bump up against things as you grow or as you leave that manager. And so I think that the manager has become so important, especially in corporate structures, which is amazing if you have a good one and really bad if you have one who isn't a good manager or is just really overwhelmed. And so my big ask, and this sounds sort of counterintuitive always, is support managers, give them resources, train them, give them time, and if they are neurodivergent or they need help, give them resources too, because to me right now when work is so fragile, they're the first line of defense, you know?
I was going to say it's really scary as well. So, I know, I mean, I'm a people leader myself, but I work with other people leaders, and I talk openly about my neurodivergence. That was a decision I made, at least partly to provide a bit of a role model or be open so that people could come and ask me about it. And I think there's nearly always good intention. I think, in fact, almost always good intention behind people, right? Nobody sets out to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, but they always worry terribly about saying the wrong thing. And actually what happens is that if you've got a people leader who is unsure, they then withdraw, which then makes it even harder for the neurodivergent professional to feel that sense of connection and safety so that they can be open. So it doesn't surprise me at all, because that is exactly what I found. And now the other topic, and I don't know if this is coming out quite so clearly in the US yet, but there's a lot of talk about Gen Z, referred to Gen Z, and their greater awareness and expectations regarding mental health and well-being and support. I mean, how do you think those generational shifts are going to play their part in terms of organizational culture?
I mean, I think it's profound. And I think that, one of the biggest things that I hear, and again, people tell me everything, is like, oh man, these Gen Z, they're entitled, they're all up in their feelings. I just want them to get to work.
Mm.
And being Gen X myself, there's a piece of me that's like, yeah, I get it. Like, it's work. and when I'm, I work as a consultant too. So like I come in and I am seconded to an organization. I don't manage a team directly, but I work with teams. There is a sense of like, wow, you guys are really different from us. And that makes me really uncomfortable. And I think it's probably always been thus. I do think that younger generations are very, very feelings forward, and that makes a lot of people very uncomfortable. And so we have to learn how to talk about it.
And I was going to, in terms of practicalities, I was going to ask you, a little bit about sort of practical strategies and coping strategies going forward. I mean, a lot of listeners are entrepreneurs or professionals trying to balance their ambition, maybe Gen Z people coming into careers and trying to work out, well, how on earth am I going to get on particularly in the UK, on the housing ladder? That's a big topic. How am I going to get a mortgage? Yeah, how am I going to make a career? All of that kind of stuff. If Morra was at the start of her career now and she sat in front of you, what would be the piece of advice you would say to her?
I think the piece of advice that I would say is to worry much less about what I'm not good at and really, really lean into my strengths, which sounds dumb and like, duh, it's not. We are obsessed in management culture with helping people improve. We are obsessed, right? Even my friend Samyan Shang always mentions this. When you go to a job interview, what questions are you asked? What are your weaknesses? If you had to cite anything that you really think you need to get better at, we're never asked, what are you amazing at, right?
Mm.
And for people like us, we're motivated by different things, and we're different, and we need to work differently. And so the biggest gift you can give yourself is twofold. One, what am I abso-friggin-lutely amazing at? And where's the market for it? And how do I become better than anyone else at it? And then number two is, how do I need to work? And what kind of job is right? Like, maybe if I'm super introverted, being a salesperson might not be the best fit for me.
Yeah.
If I need to be alone, to do my best work, which I definitely need a lot of alone time, how do I think about that? And I know it's hard because the job market isn't great, but over the long run, if you know what you're good at and set yourself up, in a way that allows you to be good, it saves a lot of heartache.
And I was also going to actually ask you about this setting yourself up to be good, almost on a day-to-day basis. So if you could pick on sort of 2 or 3 habits, because I think habits are really, really important. I read Atomic Habits a few years ago, and that really sort of struck a chord with me, this notion of habits almost maketh the identity kind of thing. What are the 2 or 3 Morra habits that you have that you would recommend to those of us of an anxious disposition on a day-to-day basis that you think are helpful?
I mean, I would say that odds are your anxiety is a habit and your critical voice is a habit. Trying to live up to expectations that you're never going to meet is a habit. And therefore, I think that building the awareness of when you're acting habitually is so important. So a lot of us get stuck in thought traps, right? We have that instant negative thought. You said for you, it's I'm lazy. Why am I not doing anything? A lot of us have imposter feelings. We never feel like we belong. A lot of us catastrophize, right? Something small and scary triggers us and we go to like a really dark place. A lot of us are emotional reasoners. We feel something, therefore it must be true. I feel like I'm going to get fired, therefore it must be true. These are habits that we build over time. And so cognitive behavioral therapy, meditation, whatever, exercise, shouting, I don't care. Finding a way, again, stimulus, I'm triggered, habitual response, I have an anxious bad thought or I do an anxious behavior. Breaking that habit and giving yourself that space in between, that is the gift you can give yourself. Like that is magic. And again, going from anxiety driving my bus to anxiety being my co-pilot, right? Like just because I feel anxiety doesn't mean I have to act anxiety. I have a choice.
Wow. And as someone who's been trying to do that work, I can vouch that when I managed to pull it off, it does indeed feel magic. But thank you for that. I only had one more question for you, really, which was actually what you're going to do next, because we talked about the project that you're doing around neurodivergence, which is a publication. What's exciting you at the moment that you've got coming up next?
I mean, I think really diving into this book, I'm doing a research study, which maybe you'll link to, asking people about their experiences. You know, I think that there's such a growing movement, but there's not much data about how we experience work and how it's affected our careers, our neurodivergence, our tricky brains. So that's exciting. And I think for me, really trying to grow my content platform. I want to launch a YouTube show so that I can bring my content to people, even more broadly. So that's exciting to me.
Honestly, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you. It's genuinely been like chatting to an old friend because, as I say, you're one of those people whose work brings me so much comfort. But I think talking to you now, you're one of a very, very small number of people who I can sit in front of and actually feel a sense of comfort, which I think is a real gift. So thank you ever so much. I will leave links to your questionnaire, which you sent me before about the book. So dear listener, go and find Morra's questionnaire. I will also leave links to the Anxious Achiever book. Spoiler alert, it's amazing. It probably will change your life when you read it, and also to the podcast so they can come and find you as well. But other than that, I would just say thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I will hopefully speak to you again one of these days.
You too. I have a lot of respect for you and what you do, Martin. So I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of The Anxious Achiever. The show is produced and edited by Mary Dew with production support and sound engineering by Nick Krinko. If you like what you heard, head to your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review. It really matters, and we appreciate the time and effort it takes. And if you don't subscribe or follow the show already, now's the time. And let us know what you'd like to hear more of. I get some of my best ideas from my listeners, so find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. You can find my weekly newsletter there as well. A big thanks to LinkedIn and all the listeners out there and our guests in the Anxious Achiever world. Until next time.